So, I'm about to ask you some questions that may sound insulting and pretentious to you, but I promise you I'm here to make a point, so just humor me for a second. Did you know the guy that made DMC 3 and 4 also made Power Stone? Did you know that Star Fox Zero is being directed by the guy who directed Bayonetta 2? Did you know that the guy responsible for Resident Evil 4 was also responsible for God Hand and Vanquish? Did you know the guy who made Steel Battalion Heavy Armor co-directed Dark Souls 3? Did you know the guy who directed Final Fantasy VII also co-directed Chrono Trigger? Did you know the guy that made the Jack and Crash games with Naughty Dog hasn't done a single thing with the company since? Did you know Uncharted 4 is the first game in the series to have absolutely no input from the original creator? Did you know that the person in charge of every 3D Grand Theft Auto game recently left the company and is suing them? Can you think of any of these people's actual names? Now, who directed Lord of the Rings? Who wrote the original books? Who's responsible for creating the movie Titanic? What other movies have they made? What about who directed the Transformers movies? What band wrote the album Master of Puppets? Can you name one member of that group? Can you name the writer of the Hunger Games novels? Were you able to answer more questions in the first category or the second? If you got more in the second category and you consider games to be your main hobby or favorite genre of art, then how come you seem to know more about other kinds of art? Look, I'm not saying I'm any better. I knew very little of this info till I went super out of my way to go hunt it down. We don't know a great deal about the people behind a lot of our favorite games. Sure, there are some names in game design that are immediately recognizable to all. Your Shigeru Miyamoto's, your Hideo Kojima's, your Gabe Newell's, even though the last one isn't really a game designer. Hell, if you're really into games, you might even know Hideki Kamiya, David Cage, Tetsuya Nomura, Todd Howard, Masahiro Sakurai, or Hidetake Miyazaki. But I'd be willing to bet you don't know Jason Jones, in spite of the fact that he was the project lead for a little-known indie game called Halo 1 and 2. I had no clue who he was till I came upon his name on the Bungie wiki. Why didn't I know who Jason Jones was? Why don't you know who Jason Jones is? And even if you know Jason Jones, why don't you know Amy Hennig, the creator of the Uncharted series? Even if you don't like their games, don't you think it's just a little weird that you haven't picked up on their name just by osmosis, given how popular their works are? And even if you know both of them, I will bet an insane amount of money that of your top 10 favorite games, you could name key personnel on tops 7 of them. And that is a legitimate problem. We have a bad habit of ascribing the creation of games to a company rather than a designer or even a team of designers. We hear Resident Evil and think Capcom. We hear Silent Hill and we think Konami. We hear Call of Duty and we think Infinity Ward. Capcom, Konami, and Infinity Ward. They aren't who makes these games. The people who work for them do. But we still think of these franchises as belonging to the companies, rather than being the manifestation of the talents of several creative people, and still hold out hope that maybe one day they may put them back on track again, in spite of the fact that all of the key personnel responsible for the creation of the entries in these series that we love have all long since departed their respective companies, and, coincidence of coincidences, those series have all had a marked and renowned drop in quality after said departures. This is a problem exclusive to gaming, and it makes no sense. Like, let's say someone were to announce that there was going to be a new Beatles album, but the album wasn't going to feature John, Paul, George, or Ringo. But it's a Beatles album, so who knows, it might be good. This isn't how music works. If a single band member leaves, it's frequently viewed as a devastating loss to the point where some bands will break up or reform under a new name just for the purposes of adjusting to the new dynamic. Now, I get it. Game companies, especially AAA devs, are different. They're frequently made of dozens if not hundreds of people with tons of different roles and purposes, with some of them not even staying with the company for the entire dev time of a single game. However, I might just be weird, but it's been my experience that the people at the top of the production pipeline, your directors, producers, composers, and so on, have had a bit of a demonstrable and consistent impact on the quality of the game they're working on. If you don't believe me, look at who was behind Final Fantasy VII, and what else they worked on, and who was behind Final Fantasy XIII, and what else they worked on. Oh my god. But who cares, you might say? My heart is made out of cold, bitter hate. Who cares about these people? I just want to play games. And fine, fair enough. If you don't care who cooks your food and you just want a good meal, that's fine. But even if you don't respect these people as artists, it would benefit literally everyone in gaming. Developers, publishers, the press, and you as a consumer, to learn the names of the people who've been behind your favorite games, and I'll explain how. This one may be the most obvious, but let's get it out of the way. DMC 3 and 4 are two of my favorite games ever. However, it wasn't until 2014 that I discovered the director of those games, Hideki Itsuno, had also directed Dragon's Dogma, a game I'd written off at a glance as being just another dark fantasy game riding the coattails of Dark Souls' success. A full 2 years after its release, I finally picked up a game that I would have bought day one had I known who created it, and, no surprise, I absolutely adored it. Capcom made a sale because I knew and trusted a developer under their employ. And if you don't believe that the creator's name alone can move a product, ask yourself why you seem to have played or plan to play nearly every game by Hideo Kojima. Or take it outside of gaming. Why have you watched every movie in the Hobbit trilogy in spite of them being fairly bland? This is Marketing 101, and people recognize names. Kojima made a career off of this. A Hideo Kojima game is ubiquitous, and it served Konami well for decades. Why isn't Bloodborne a Hidetaki Miyazaki game? It seems like an easy way to push more units. Unless, you know, your games are trash. Okay, to be honest, publishers may lose a little bit by giving credit to creators since they can't just hand the IP over to some Randy and screw over their workers whenever they see fit. We saw what happens when you do that when Kojima got pseudo-fired from Konami. People completely lost it, and rightfully so. But no one said anything when Prince of Persia Sands of Time director and Assassin's Creed 1 and 2 and Brotherhood creator Patrice Désilets, God, I hope I'm pronouncing that right, was unceremoniously fired from Ubisoft. No one cared about this, so Assassin's Creed got to continue on as though nothing happened, even though the next couple games in the series were pretty mediocre. Meanwhile, the Metal Gear Solid franchise is most likely officially dead because fans know it won't be the same series they were in love with. In short, doing this takes away a publisher's ability to screw over specific devs by forcing people to take notice when it happens. However, let's not forget, for decades, Konami was making money off of Kojima's recognizability. Hell, even in the days before his departure, they were still planning on using his name to make money. And it was working! We all still want Silent Hills! You might say we want it not because of Kojima, but Del Toro and Norman Reedus, but that just proves my point further. We didn't want Silent Hills because it was a Silent Hill game. The Silent Hill name is trash at this point. We wanted Silent Hills because it had the names of talented people attached to it, and we all would have paid through the nose for it. In short, it's the same deal as to why it benefits devs. Marketing 101 and all that. Just with a couple more caveats. And if that's not enough motivation for you, You can do what Sony did and steal major devs away from other publishers to boost the value of your own brand. How many articles could be written about directors as people? I mean, that already kind of happens, but how many more hits would those articles have gotten if people had actually knew and cared about the people you were writing on? It's true that there are currently plenty of articles about these directors and producers, but their names seldom show up in the one place it matters the most: the reviews. Your name might show up if you're a Shigeru Miyamoto, but probably won't if you're a Yusuke Hishimoto. This is the perfect chance to bring the names of these people to the forefront and make people care about them. And getting people to care about creatives is worth its weight in gold. I will click every article and review that comes into my field of vision about Hideki Kamiya because I am heavily invested in him as a creative, because I know he made Devil May Cry, Bayonetta, and Wonderful 101. This is basic. We read and seek out info on people we care about. However, I would have glossed over every article that's about the Scalebound director if I didn't know that director was Kamiya. Because I have no reason to care about that director. What's a Scalebound? Who cares? However, an article titled Hideki Kamiya opens up about his new game, yeah, I'll read that. Every time. Okay, so remember all the good stuff I said about how it benefits devs because it makes them a bit more protected through recognizability? The opposite is also true. I remember attending the midnight launch for Resident Evil 5 and dropping $60 unholy dollars on the thing to rush home and play it to completion, only to find that it was a noticeable drop in quality in nearly every department from Resident Evil 4. It wasn't until this year I discovered it was the first Resident Evil game to feature absolutely no input from series creator Shinji Mikami, and was directed by two people who had literally never directed a game before. You may not have this story, but you probably have one like it, be it something as obvious as DMC Devil May Cry, or something a little more surprising like the later Silent Hill games, or Metal Gear Solid Portable Ops. A game you were excited for, where the quality was dragged down by the absence of veteran staff who was supposed to be there. If you did a thorough examination of all of the games that have disappointed you, I promise you, you'll find at least one that is almost definitely in the state it's in because it wasn't made by the person you thought it was. And this doesn't even mean that you shouldn't buy it. Aliens was a great sequel without Ridley Scott, and I knew Itsuno didn't make DMC, so I was able to adjust my expectations a bit and actually had a little bit of fun. However, I went into Resident Evil 5 with incredibly high expectations because I was expecting Resident Evil 4, but better. Maybe if I'd known that Resident Evil 5 hadn't been directed by the guy who directed 4, I could have adjusted my expectations, and I'd be able to view it as just another big dumb shooter than one of the most mediocre sequels I've ever played. I'm going to come clean with you guys. Up until this point, I've been talking about this purely from a consumerist perspective, and while I think that's good and important, it's honestly not my biggest concern. Our community loves to talk at great length about how games are art, they're important, they've affected us, and all of this good stuff. But we don't treat them like art. If a novel review failed to mention the author, we'd call the critic a hack. If a review of a film failed to discuss the director and their previous work, we would laugh it out of the room. If an album review failed to mention the band's name and who the lead songwriter is, we'd think it was a joke. Why are we okay treating games like this? The answer is simple, really, and it's a broader problem. In spite of all of the strides we've made in having mainstream culture take games seriously, we, ironically, might not take them seriously enough, at least not in the ways that matter. I know I'm not the first person to point this out, but we still view games as boxed products rather than creative works. And you know what? some games can justifiably be viewed as Vox products. However, the overwhelming majority of games are art. And I'm not even saying this in the pretentious indie game walking simulator way. Braid is widely regarded as art, and rightfully so, but by any definition, Call of Duty Modern Warfare is also art. Maybe not high art, and debatably not even good art, but it is art. And just because something isn't high art doesn't mean we shouldn't respect it and take it seriously. I mean, no one thinks The Road Warrior is a Kubrick film, but I have literally never met anyone who didn't think it was a great, or at least important, work of cinema. Why don't we hold Halo Combat Evolved in the same regard? I know that sounds really weird to ask, but we have to ask it. Anyone who follows film passionately knows George Miller's name. Why don't we know Jason Jones or Joseph Staten, even though they have arguably affected gaming just as much? For all of our talk of wanting games to be taken seriously as art, most of us don't want to talk about games as though they are art. We pew-pew any criticisms we don't like or agree with. We mash start or escape during the credits roll, and most of all, care more about what's making our game rather than who. I don't have any delusions about this. I know focusing more on who's responsible for our games won't fix everything, but it will still help us all. We'll better know what games are worth our time and money. The jobs of creatives will become more secure and grant them more creative control, and it will allow us to better talk about games as creative works. And frankly, I feel that if we've put hundreds of hours into a game that we adore, the least we can do is learn the name of one or two of the people responsible for our joy. If you're watching this right now, you're on a computer of some kind, which means Google is right there. So please, take a minute, Google your favorite game, and see if you can find out who directed it. And who knows? Maybe you'll get a pleasant surprise. Hey everyone, Ryan here. Thanks for watching. This was a long time in the making. I'm hoping to use this as a jumping off point to start releasing a series of videos where I examine different game makers' careers and design styles, the first episode of which will focus on our Lord and Savior Hideki Kamiya. Game reviews and analysis are also on their way down the pipeline, so if that sounds interesting to you, or you just want to listen to me ramble a bit more, then maybe give this video a like and think about subscribing, or don't. I don't control you, I'm just some guy. Thanks again for watching, bye!